Boom! The explosion ripped through the air, and the entire training range fell silent. A young female mechanic, someone everyone thought only knew how to hold a wrench and an oil rag, had just pulled the trigger on the Barrett .50. The heavy round tore through the air, punching a hole in the thick steel as if it were paper. Smoke still lingered at the barrel when the mocking eyes from moments ago instantly turned to stunned disbelief. She stayed silent, her gaze steady, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Yet in that moment, secrets buried for years were suddenly laid bare. The echo of the gunshot still lingered in the ears of the recruits, like a stretched note that refused to fade. The smoke hadn't fully cleared, yet the weapons maintenance room had already returned to its silence. The woman bent down, her eyes fixed on the massive block of steel before her. The Barrett lay stretched out on the oilcloth, like a creature in deep sleep, waiting for her skilled hands to rouse it. Her fingers touched the bolt catch. A slight twist, effortless, without even looking. The heavy component slid out and was set neatly beside the others. Next came the handguard, the cover, each piece separating from the rifle's body as though guided by an invisible rhythm. No diagrams, no instructions. Everything flowed as if memory itself had been etched into her muscles. A recruit stood quietly, eyes wide. He was used to watching comrades struggle with this weapon, sweat dripping, the harsh clang of metal, fumbling hands betraying their nerves. But here, in front of him, the rifle seemed to soften, almost yielding to her touch. He swallowed hard, trying to stifle the sound of his breath. From another corner, a few more gathered. At first it was simple curiosity, but the longer they watched, the deeper they were drawn into the silent rhythm. This wasn't ordinary maintenance. Each movement she made was precise, deliberate, as if she carried a detailed map of every screw, every groove in her head. The barrel slid out from the receiver. She placed it on the cloth, her hands moving at a steady pace, sometimes with a faint rhythm, as though tapping out a private melody. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching her face, glinting on the thin sheen of oil still clinging to the steel. Something in that image hushed the young soldiers completely. A faint smile touched the corner of her lips. Not because anyone praised her, not because she wanted to show off. It was the discreet smile of a craftswoman reunited with familiar work, like an artist brushing her fingers across a beloved instrument. To her, the Barrett wasn't the monster others saw, it was simply a machine designed to function with precision, and machines, once understood, would always obey. One private sitting at the back couldn't resist a soft whistle. He was quickly nudged in the leg by the soldier next to him. But that small outburst of curiosity spoke for the entire group. They had never seen a woman, let alone someone who wasn't a sniper, handle the massive rifle with such ease. She continued. Her hand slid over the recoil assembly, dismantled it, wiped it in one smooth stroke, then reassembled it with nothing more than a slight nod. The metal clicked into place with a sharp tack, like the sound of a door lock finally giving way after years unopened. In that instant, every head in the room lifted. In the minds of the recruits, the same question surfaced all at once. How many times has she done this? And why? Some smirked in disbelief, others frowned in doubt. But all of them were drawn to that table. Why would an ordinary mechanic be so fluent with this weapon? The Barrett had driven more than a few to tears during sniper school, simply because they couldn't complete the disassembly within the time limit. Yet here, there was no stopwatch, no instructor breathing down her neck, only her hands, moving in perfect synchrony with the steel parts, natural as breathing. The atmosphere shifted into something strange. The chatter and laughter from earlier had vanished. In their place, the hiss of oiled cloth, the slide of metal fitting back into place, the slow, measured breaths of the woman herself. For a moment, the training ground outside, with its shouting voices and pounding footsteps, seemed cut off from reality. This room contained only her and the rifle. One recruit whispered, just loud enough to be heard in the silence, "Isn't this technique only taught in advanced sniper school?" No one answered. The question hung in the air, leaving the group unsettled. Perhaps they didn't really want the answer just yet, because somewhere deep inside, admiration was already taking root, tangled with suspicion. If she wasn't just a mechanic, then who was she really? The sharp click rang out as the final piece locked into place. For a few seconds, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then suddenly, a dry, cutting chuckle broke the fragile silence. A young corporal, his face still boyish, shoulders stiff under the crisp weight of a new uniform, stood with arms crossed, leaning against the doorway. His eyes swept over the Barrett on the table, then settled on the woman bent over, polishing each line of gleaming steel. In that moment, he seemed to think he'd uncovered something laughable, a way to release the pressure of training. The words slipped out lightly, like a passing breeze, but carried far enough to spark ripples of laughter. "You learned this stuff on YouTube? The Barrett isn't some Lego set." Laughter spread like a chain reaction. One nudged another, boots tapped softly against the concrete, eyes darted back and forth with unspoken jokes. To these young recruits, the sight of an ordinary woman beside such a massive weapon was already strange. The mocking line was just an excuse to vent their own unease. But the surprise came from her. No retort, no glance. She simply lowered her head and continued her work, hands moving with steady rhythm as if she hadn't heard a thing. The oil rag slid across the rifle's body, leaving behind a polished sheen under the training room lights. Silence. Not awkward, not strained, solid, like steel. It was that silence that slowly shifted the air in the room. The laughter, loud at first, began to falter, like a small fire starved of oxygen. A few eyes drifted from mockery to unease. She needed no words to defend herself. Her focus was her shield. Every motion of her fingers, every precise placement, was a quiet rebuttal. You have no idea what you're witnessing. A bead of sweat traced down the temple of the young corporal who had laughed. He swallowed hard, forcing a stiff smile, as though determined not to be defeated by her composure. His buddies nudged him, whispered something under their breath, but none dared raise their voices again. In the wide room, even the smallest sounds now seemed amplified. The rustle of cloth as she shifted, the faint snap of a spring as the bolt slid out, the steady cadence of her own breathing. Together, they wove into a background rhythm that drowned out the childish laughter from before. The contrast was undeniable. On one side, the noisy immaturity of youth. On the other, a calm so unshakable it unsettled them. And soon enough, that calm became the only thing filling the room. Another private tried to lighten the tension with a forced grin. Well, at least she's not live streaming this on TikTok. The line fell flat, swallowed by the silence. No one followed. The group was beginning to realize every joke only made them seem more out of place in this scene. Meanwhile, she carried on, not once lifting her face, as though none of them existed. Only her and the Barrett, and the sheen of oil gleaming under the lights. Her silence wasn't avoidance, it was a reverse test. The louder anyone laughed, the more clumsy they revealed themselves to be. And with every passing second, the laughter withered, replaced by a strange mixed discomfort, curiosity, and something else, admiration. Some began to step back, but their eyes never left her movements. The questions dangled in their minds. Who is she really? Why is she so fluent with this weapon? And why doesn't she react to the mockery? The room, once buzzing with jokes and jeers, now held only the steady sounds of metal and cloth. Simple sounds, but strangely, they had become the strongest presence of all. And in the corner, the Barrett was taking shape again, each piece sliding into place as though following destiny. No one was laughing anymore. They could only watch, waiting to see what would happen next. Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the final click rang out as the recoil assembly locked into place. The Barrett lay there, nearly the length of a person, like a predator awakening from a long slumber. The overhead light glinted off the barrel, flashing like a blade waiting for command. The room stayed deathly still, the tension from earlier laughter now suffocated by her unyielding silence. A soldier coughed lightly, breaking the heavy rhythm. Then, as if to salvage a shred of pride for the group of young recruits, a sergeant stepped forward, his tone half curious, half challenging. He pointed toward the outdoor range, where a thick steel target stood tall. The distance was nearly 900 meters, a trial not small, even for trained snipers. No explanation, no defense. She lifted the rifle onto her shoulder and walked toward the range. The thud of her boots against the concrete echoed sharp and dry, making more than a few throats swallow hard. A strange moment unfolded. The same recruits who loved to jeer now trailed behind her, like an unwilling entourage. Outside, the wind carried the acrid tang of sun-scorched dust and gunpowder. The firing range stretched out like a miniature battlefield. Wind flags snapped and fluttered, concrete bleachers cast long shadows. The steel target loomed tall, a defiant wall daring anyone bold enough to set their sights on it. She spread a cloth on the ground, placed the Barrett atop it, and attached the bipod. Each movement smooth, nothing wasted. Every eye followed her, half doubtful, half enthralled. She dropped into a prone position, pressing her cheek to the stock. Her slender frame seemed to merge with the 14-kilo mass of steel. Her left hand adjusted the bipod's angle. Her right pulled back the bolt. A 12.7 millimeters round slid into the chamber, the click ringing clear enough for the entire range to hear. The air thickened. Someone drew a deep breath. Another muttered a quiet prayer, but she kept her breathing steady. Her chest rose and fell evenly, her eye locked through the scope, cold and sharp as glass. Time slowed. The young soldiers, usually restless, suddenly found themselves silently hoping for something. The shot could miss. But if it landed, they would have to accept that every laugh earlier was nothing but a foolish farce. A breeze swept past, tossing a few stray strands of hair across her forehead. She didn't brush them aside, only tilted her head slightly, eyes fixed on the target. In the scope, the steel plate at the far end of the range shrank small, yet it could not escape the crosshairs. And then, boom! The sound roared, crashing against the concrete walls, rolling across the range. The Barrett's recoil kicked hard, enough to make most recruits wince, but she only eased her shoulder back, keeping the rifle steady. Smoke coiled upward, swirling into the hot wind. At the far end, the steel target quivered, sparks scattering. A clean, round hole gaped in its center, so precise it looked as if drilled by machine. The massive round had torn straight through, leaving behind an undeniable mark. Silence. No one spoke. No one laughed. The young recruits stood frozen, eyes wide. Some mouths hung open, others swallowed dry, all wearing the same expression, disbelief. Just a moment ago they had dismissed her as a simple mechanic, an out-of-place figure on the training ground. Now, that image lay shattered. She lowered the rifle unhurried, unpretentious. Her hands moved as though setting down a musical instrument after a flawless performance. Her face betrayed no emotion. To her, the shot wasn't proof of anything. It was simply work. A gust of wind, the echo of the gunshot still clung to the concrete walls. The smell of gunpowder hadn't yet faded, and already the entire range had fallen into an unbelievable silence. The steel plate in the distance still trembled faintly, bearing witness to what had just happened. The recruits stood frozen, none of them remembering how they had laughed only minutes before. Then a sudden movement shattered the still frame. From the corridor leading to the range, the figure of a man appeared. His stride was firm, each step decisive, as if even the hard ground gave way beneath him. A worn cap pulled low, streaks of gray hair showing underneath. Strips of afternoon sunlight fell across his shoulders, illuminating insignia that anyone could recognize at a glance. Navy SEAL Colonel. No introductions, no announcement needed. The entire firing line straightened instinctively, not from orders, but from the authority radiating off the man. His slow, heavy steps carried him closer. He stopped just behind them, narrowed his eyes, and raised a scope. Through the lens, the thick steel plate, a perfectly round hole dead center, too exact to be mistaken for luck. Lowering the scope, his gray-blue eyes fixed on the small woman still lying prone, the Barrett resting quietly beside her like a beast suddenly tamed. The young soldier swallowed hard, bracing for the storm of questions, but his voice came steady and low, not an accusation, not a reprimand, tinged instead with genuine astonishment. "Who taught you to strip and reassemble that fast? And who taught you to shoot 900 meters without touching the scope?" No one dared answer for her. Every gaze turned toward her. She simply lifted herself, sat up, brushed a thin film of dust from her sleeve. No explanation. The colonel stepped closer, leaned down to inspect the Barrett, then raised his eyes to hers. For a long moment, silence pressed in, as if the entire range had stopped breathing. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. "This skill," he paused, speaking slowly, "I've only ever seen among top-level snipers. In Afghanistan, no more than 5 men could do it." The words dropped heavy, more resounding than any gunshot. The laughter from before shattered into shards of shame inside each soldier's mind. No one dared meet another's eyes. They lowered their heads, trying to hide their embarrassment. Meanwhile, she sat unmoved, calm as though the colonel's words had nothing to do with her. To her, this recognition wasn't something to flaunt. It was simply truth laid bare, whether she wanted it or not. The slanting sun reflected off the scope, now lowered. A gust of wind swept through, carrying dust and that thick silence. The colonel remained standing, eyes still fixed on her. In that look was more than surprise. There was respect he couldn't quite mask. Off in the distance, a few young soldiers shifted, restless for a way to escape the awkwardness. But none dared move farther. They understood this moment had gone beyond an ordinary drill. This was the moment an unknown mechanic had made the entire range and a SEAL colonel himself pause. It needed no applause, no cheers. Silence itself was proof. Silence, and the nod of a man who had walked through dozens of battlefields. And somewhere inside the recruits, a question began to swell, louder than their earlier shame. What kind of past does this woman carry, to make even a SEAL colonel bow his head in recognition? News of the strange gunshot and the SEAL colonel's nod spread like fire in the wind. At the base, rumors lived longer than orders, and the whispered question on everyone's lips was the same. Who is she? Not everyone knew the answer, because most of what defined her never appeared in reports, never made it into official records. It existed where war had left its mark. Iraq. In the early years, when the battlefield still burned red, she was just an armorer. The job sounded simple. Clean, oil, replace broken parts. But in Iraq, nothing was simple. Weapons returning from the front carried desert dust, blood, and the survival of soldiers. A single mistake, a jammed bolt, could cost a life. She learned to tilt her ear and listen for the click of a spring snapping back, to smell the faint scorch inside a barrel and know the metal was overstressed. Where others saw a block of steel, she sensed its breath. Day by day, hour by hour, the Barrett slowly became a secret language only she understood. At first, no one noticed. A woman, cleaning rifles in a corner of the base, that was all. But gradually, frontline snipers began to trust her. They handed her their rifles with half-cautious, half-hopeful looks. And when the weapons came back smooth as new, those looks changed. Someone once joked, "Best way to test a Barrett? Let her fire it first." A joke, but one that turned true. Many times under the cover of night, the crack of a .50 caliber round split the air, the Barrett kicking in her hands, the slug burying itself in wooden targets. No one called it training. They called it a check. But to her, each trigger pull was a lesson, each shot carved deeper into her memory. She studied on her own, made notes. In a worn notebook, the pages were crowded with tiny scribbles. How many clicks to adjust the scope for a given wind speed? How desert humidity bent a bullet's path? How long before the recoil pad needed replacing? No official syllabus, no classroom, only the night, the creak of a fan, and a young woman hunched over a dim flashlight. Battle-hardened snipers, men known for their pride and sharp eyes, gradually learned to trust in silence. Before each mission, they stopped by, handing her their Barretts. Some tapped the stock and teased, "If I come back alive tonight, it'll be because of these hands." They laughed, but in their eyes was another truth. They trusted her more than the entire armory. No records kept it, no medals pinned to her chest. She was just a shadow in the reports, a name tucked into the technical logistics column. But within the small base, on nights in Iraq filled with dust and explosions, everyone knew. If a Barrett was to be trusted, it had to pass through her hands. There was one memory she carried for years. One night, desert winds howled, and a scout team returned. A tall sniper, caked in dust, dropped his Barrett in front of her. The rifle was heavy, armor thick with sand. He said nothing, only nodded, eyes weary. She bent down, wiped it clean, each layer of dirt falling away like fragments of memory. When she reassembled it and handed it back, he raised it, fired once at a distant target. The bullet hit clean, straight. He turned back and, for the first time, raised a thumb at her. No words needed. A fleeting moment, but it was like a silent medal. She never left Iraq's shadows as a hero. No brass band sent her off, no article bore her name. She came home as she had gone, quietly, with hands used to gun oil, and a notebook no one else would ever read. All those skills were never documented, never certified. They were fragments of memory, built over years, silent, like the woman herself. And now, at the training base firing range, when the bullet pierced steel and the SEAL colonel nodded, the buried past rose into the light. Every long night in Iraq, every test round fired, every faded line in that old notebook, none of it had ever vanished. The question echoing in everyone's mind was no longer, who is she? But rather, if she was only ever a mechanic, how does she hold skills beyond even trained snipers? The next morning, the usually quiet armory room became unusually crowded. Rows of combat boots lined up at the door, their steady thumps on the concrete floor forming a rhythm like roll call. But no one had been ordered here. They came willingly. The recruits who once laughed and mocked now carried rifles in their hands. Their eyes no longer held the cocky gleam of youth, but a mix of caution and nervous anticipation. Some even blushed, as if walking into a retake exam after failing miserably the first time. In the center of the room, she sat there, still in the same old coveralls, the same calm posture. In front of her, the Barrett lay open, its parts neatly arranged, as though yesterday had never ended. A young sergeant, the very one who had laughed the loudest the day before, suddenly trembled as he held out his Barrett to her. His voice dropped, faltering. "Please, show me how to adjust the bipod. I've never hit anything past 600 meters." No scolding, no mention of the past. She simply nodded, patience glinting in her eyes. Then, with a steady tone, she guided him step by step. How to place the rifle so it wouldn't shake, how to set the bipod legs to absorb recoil, how to lower the shoulder to maintain stability. Not a single detail was overlooked. The other soldiers stood in a circle, utterly silent. Every word she spoke was swallowed whole, as if it were official doctrine they had never been taught. Some instinctively scribbled in notebooks, others locked their eyes on her every movement. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. If yesterday was filled with mockery, today was hushed respect. The silence of those realizing that knowledge isn't always in textbooks or handed down by instructors, but born from experience, from years spent anonymous yet never meaningless. She showed no superiority. On the contrary, she occasionally smiled softly, slipping in little tips. Only someone long familiar with the Barrett would know. How to tilt the rifle so oil wouldn't pool in the barrel. How to store it without bending the bipod. She even added a touch of humor. Trust me, if you over-oil it, that Barrett will slip like a catfish and no one's holding it down. The group laughed this time lightheartedly, without bitterness. Just then, a familiar figure stepped in. The SEAL Colonel. He said nothing at first, just stood watching. His eyes swept over the young soldiers' faces before settling on the woman, who was explaining with the patience of a teacher. In his hand, something small caught the light. A SEAL Challenge coin. For American troops, it was more than metal. It was a symbol of honor, something no one could ask for, only given when truly earned. He walked closer, each step making the air heavier. She looked up, her eyes calm as ever. He stopped in front of her, his hand firm but deliberate as he placed the coin into hers. Not casually. He folded her fingers around it, pressing it into memory. His gaze locked on hers, unwavering, without the slightest hesitation. His voice broke the silence, deep and steady. This isn't just for that shot. This is for all the years you worked in the shadows, so that others could live. No one clapped. None was needed. In that moment, silence itself was the loudest anthem. The recruits watched, feeling as though they were witnessing a solemn ceremony, where past and present met. The coin rested in her hand, small yet weighty. It couldn't compare to medals or ribbons, but for special operators, it was worth more. Because it carried this meaning: we see you, we acknowledge you. A few young soldiers turned away, hiding the sting in their eyes. They knew this moment would follow them for life, a reminder that sometimes heroes don't wear rank, don't appear in reports, but quietly wipe down rifles in a corner of the base. And then, each of them silently asked themselves, could a woman once dismissed truly change the way we see sacrifice and honor? That afternoon, as the sun turned golden over the barracks, the armory room sank back into its familiar silence. The door stood ajar, a slant of light cutting through, glinting off oil stains on the concrete floor. And in her usual corner, she sat no different than on the first day. Faded coveralls, hair tied back, hands steadily guiding an oil rag across cold steel. The Barrett lay in front of her, disassembled into its parts. No more murmurs, no more crowded onlookers like that morning. Only the faint clink of metal, the rustle of cloth, and the steady rhythm of someone long accustomed to solitude. As if the armor-piercing shot had never happened. As if the astonished stares of dozens of soldiers had never existed. As if the nod of a SEAL colonel had never been given. Out in the hall, a few soldiers passed by. They no longer joked or nudged each other with laughter. Instead, each paused briefly, eyes flicking into the room. And then, as if by some new ritual, they bowed their heads slightly in salute. No words, just a small gesture that said, "We saw, and we respect." She looked up for a moment, calm eyes steady, then bent back down, continuing to wipe each line of metal. No smile, no reply. That silence was the answer. The SEAL Challenge coin still rested in her pocket, cold, heavy, strangely unfamiliar. She had never imagined she would touch that symbol, much less have it handed to an anonymous mechanic absent from the records. But now it was there, close to her heart, a reminder that the years spent in Iraq's shadows had not been meaningless. She pulled it out, turning it in the light. The metal caught the setting sun, scattering flickers across the wall. Then quietly she set it down on the table, right beside the disassembled barrel of the Barrett. A small detail, but enough to transform the corner into a picture laden with meaning, weapon and honor, side by side, in the hands of someone once invisible. Outside, the range thundered with shouted commands. Boots pounded in unison, rhythms of urgency. But inside the small room, the rhythm was different. Slow, steady, unshowy, just like her. At times, when the light brushed her face, a faint smile flickered. So slight, so brief, she might not have even noticed it herself. Perhaps it wasn't pride, but peace. As if after all these years she had finally seen recognition, even if only for a moment. A young soldier stopped at the doorway, lingering. He seemed to wrestle with words, then abandoned them. In the end, he simply raised his hand in a crisp salute and walked away. She glanced up, gave a faint nod, then returned to her task. The room settled back into what it truly was, a space where a woman and a Barrett shared silence. Some called her a mechanic. Some had begun whispering, legend. But she needed no title. For her, everything was contained in the familiar cycle. Disassemble, clean, reassemble, check. An endless loop, quiet but unyielding, just like the life she had lived for years. And the question, still hanging in the minds of those who had witnessed it, remained unanswered. Was she just an ordinary mechanic, or truly an unsung legend, one that perhaps only the Barrett .50 itself really knew? And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe.